Dr. Ethan Harrison was well known in the medical community. A renowned cardiologist at one of New York City's most prestigious hospitals, his name had become synonymous with excellence. His days were packed with back-to-back appointments, surgeries, and consultations. The routine had become second nature to him. Each case, each patient, a problem to be solved. His life was precise, predictable, and focused on his work. Ethan's professional success had earned him the respect of his colleagues and the admiration of his patients. But deep inside, he felt a lingering sense of emptiness, an understanding that something was missing. He had always been driven by the pursuit of perfection in his field, but the complexities of the human heart were far more complicated than just medical knowledge. It was in this environment that Ethan first met Lily Carter. Lily came to the hospital through a charity program aimed at assisting patients who couldn't afford treatment. Her background was nothing like Ethan's. She had grown up in a rundown neighborhood in Brooklyn, where survival often meant making difficult choices. Her family struggled to make ends meet, and she had always taken care of her younger siblings while her mother worked long hours at a local diner. Lily had learned early on that the world didn't offer handouts. If she wanted something, she had to fight for it. Despite her difficult circumstances, Lily had an infectious optimism that seemed to defy everything around her. Her bright, warm eyes were a sharp contrast to her fragile, pale face, which was often clouded by pain from her chronic heart condition. She had been struggling with severe heart problems for years, but because she couldn't afford the necessary treatments, her condition had only worsened. She had learned to live with the pain, to push through it, but that didn't mean she had given up hope. When Ethan walked into her hospital room for the first time, he expected to see a patient who was resigned to her fate, someone who had lost the will to fight. But instead, he was met with a woman who, despite her gaunt appearance and the constant fatigue in her voice, wore a faint smile and spoke with a quiet but determined tone. She was not what he had expected, and that alone intrigued him. "Dr. Harrison, I've heard so much about you," she said, her voice soft yet confident. "I'm just glad I finally got the chance to see someone who might help me." Ethan glanced at her medical chart briefly before making eye contact. "I'm glad you came in," he replied, keeping his tone professional, though there was a note of empathy in his voice that he didn't usually offer to patients he had just met. "I've looked over your records. It's clear you've been suffering for quite some time." Lily nodded, her eyes flickering with something more than just pain. There was resilience there, a strength that Ethan hadn't expected from someone in her condition. "I've been fighting this for years," she said, a hint of pride in her words. "But I know I need help now. I can't keep going like this." Ethan sat down beside her bed, carefully reviewing her medical history. There was a sense of calm in the room, an unspoken understanding between them. It was rare for Ethan to find a patient who didn't just rely on him for answers, but who was also willing to fight alongside him. There was something about Lily that made him want to do more, something that made him believe that her willpower could be the key to her recovery. Over the next few days, as Ethan continued his consultations with Lily, he found himself captivated not only by her courage in the face of adversity, but by her sharp wit and her ability to laugh despite the difficulties she faced. Unlike many of his other patients, who were either too fearful or too cynical, Lily didn't treat him like a savior. Instead, she treated him like a partner in her battle. She was direct with him, asking questions that most patients wouldn't dare, probing the nature of her illness with an understanding that far exceeded her years. "Is this my fault?" she had asked him one afternoon. "I mean, I grew up on fast food and didn't always take care of myself. But I didn't have the choice to eat well. Is this what happens when you don't have the money to do the right things?" Ethan was taken aback by the question. In all his years of practice, no patient had ever been so honest with themselves or with him about their own role in their health. Most patients, especially the ones from wealthier families, expected solutions to be quick and easy, never taking the time to reflect on their own lifestyle choices. "No, Lily," he said softly, his voice reassuring. "It's not your fault. There are many factors that play into heart disease, some of which are beyond anyone's control. But we're going to work together to make sure you get the treatment you need, and we'll start from here." Her gratitude was apparent. But what struck Ethan most was the way she held herself in the face of such difficult circumstances. She wasn't just a patient to him. She was a person who had learned to navigate life's challenges in ways that even he, with all his education and privilege, had never had to. As the weeks went on, their professional relationship deepened. Ethan would visit Lily regularly, not just for her treatment, but also for their conversations. Lily's ability to keep a positive outlook in the midst of her struggles started to affect him in ways he couldn't quite explain. He would catch himself looking forward to their talks, to hearing her thoughts on the world around her. She had a way of making him think differently about the life he had been living, about the walls he had built around himself, and the purpose he had been chasing for so long. At the same time, Lily began to open up more about her life. She told him about the struggles she had faced growing up, about the sacrifices her family had made, and about the dreams she had for a better future. She spoke with such passion that Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for her. One evening, as he sat at her bedside, discussing the progress of her treatment, he found himself gazing at her in a way he hadn't before. His admiration for her, which had started as professional respect, had gradually turned into something far more personal. He realized, with a jolt, that he was no longer just her doctor. He was someone who was becoming deeply affected by her spirit, by the quiet strength she exuded every day. Ethan's heart, once so focused on medicine and professional success, now seemed to beat in sync with Lily's, a rhythm that pulled him deeper into her world, a world that was full of hardship, but also full of life. He found himself thinking about her when he wasn't with her, wondering how she was feeling, hoping that she was getting better. The lines between doctor and patient began to blur, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about love, class, and what truly mattered. Ethan's life had always been a carefully orchestrated symphony, a perfect balance of work, status, and social obligations. The Harrison family name had been synonymous with wealth, power, and prestige for generations. His mother, Margaret Harrison, had been the orchestrator of this world, a woman whose every move was calculated to preserve the family's legacy. Margaret was not just a socialite. She was a force. Her presence in any room commanded attention, her opinions shaping the lives of those around her, especially her son. Margaret had spent Ethan's entire life molding him into the man she believed he should be, a successful, respected doctor, a well-spoken figure in high society, and above all, a man who would marry within the circles that could elevate the family even further. As a mother, she had always been proud of Ethan's accomplishments, but she had also viewed them through the lens of legacy. To her, his life was not simply about happiness or fulfillment. It was about preserving their place among the elite. When Ethan first began spending more time with Lily, he didn't think much of it. She was, after all, just a patient, someone who needed help, and someone who had become a part of his daily routine. But as their relationship grew deeper, Ethan found himself drawn to Lily in ways that he couldn't ignore. She was strong, compassionate, and real, and with every passing day, Ethan found himself caring for her more and more. But what Ethan didn't anticipate was how Margaret would react when she learned about the growing connection between her son and someone so beneath their social station. Margaret, who prided herself on keeping the family's affairs in perfect order, was horrified when she discovered that Ethan was spending time with a woman like Lily. She had learned of the relationship through one of her close friends who had seen them together at a charity event. Margaret was furious, not just with the idea of Ethan's involvement with someone so beneath him, but with what it meant for her carefully constructed plans for his life. "You're seeing that woman?" Margaret's voice was cold, her tone sharp as she confronted Ethan in the drawing room of their luxurious Manhattan estate. The opulent decor around them seemed to reflect her icy demeanor, everything about the room designed to reinforce the family's superiority. Ethan, who had been pacing the room, turned to face his mother, sensing the storm that was coming. "Lily is a patient of mine, Mother. There's no need to make a spectacle out of it," he said, trying to remain calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He wasn't prepared for her reaction. "A patient?" Margaret repeated, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You've been spending time with her, haven't you? Socializing with a woman who has no status, no education, no connections. And you think I won't notice?" Her voice wavered with anger and disbelief, the words coming out in a disjointed rush, as though she were trying to convince herself that what she was hearing wasn't true. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "Mother, Lily is different. She's not what you think she is." Margaret cut him off, her voice now laced with an edge of bitterness. "She is exactly what I think she is, Ethan. A poor, unrefined girl with no future. You can't honestly believe that this is a relationship worth pursuing." Her words were calculated, each one meant to pierce through him. "You're a doctor, for heaven's sake. You've worked so hard to build your career. Do you honestly want to throw it all away for someone who will only drag you down? You need a woman who will help you maintain your position in society. Someone who can carry herself with grace, who will help elevate the Harrison name. Not someone who will only bring scandal." Ethan's chest tightened, the words stinging more than he had expected. His mother had always been a woman of strong opinions, but never had she been this cruel or dismissive. She had spent years teaching him that love, family, and success were intertwined, bound by duty and societal expectations. But this was different. Ethan was no longer sure of what he wanted in life, and this conversation only made it harder for him to reconcile his emotions with his mother's rigid view of the world. "She's more than that, Mother," Ethan said, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. "She's strong, intelligent, and kind. She's everything I could ask for in a partner." Margaret's expression hardened, her lips curling into a tight line. "Strong? Intelligent? Ethan, do you hear yourself? You're making excuses for her. I've seen this before. It's a phase, a fleeting infatuation that you'll eventually grow out of. You can't seriously think that someone like her is going to be the person you marry." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't ignore what he was feeling, what he had come to realize about Lily. She wasn't just another patient. She wasn't someone to be dismissed because of her background. The way she had handled her illness, the way she cared for others even when she could barely take care of herself, those things spoke volumes about who she was. Ethan had never met anyone like her, but his mother's harsh words and the weight of her expectations began to cloud his thoughts. Margaret continued, pressing the attack. "You've spent your entire life building a future for yourself, Ethan. You've been groomed for greatness. Don't throw it all away for someone who can't even offer you the most basic of what you deserve." Ethan's heart ached as he heard the truth in her words. At least, the version of truth she believed in. He was torn between the life his mother had planned for him and the one that felt more real, more fulfilling. As much as he wanted to defy her, to follow his heart, he couldn't ignore the pressure she was putting on him. It was more than just the future of his career. It was the future of the family's name, the expectations of society, and everything he had been taught to value. "I need time to think about this," Ethan said quietly, his voice strained. He didn't want to argue anymore, didn't want to acknowledge how much her disapproval hurt him. But he also didn't want to lose what he had with Lily. Margaret was silent for a moment, her icy gaze never leaving him. "Take all the time you need, Ethan. But know this. You will regret it if you let a woman like that ruin everything you've worked for." With those final words, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ethan standing there, conflicted, heart heavy with doubt. In the days that followed, the weight of Margaret's disapproval began to settle over Ethan like a heavy fog. He had always respected his mother, admired her strength, and valued her guidance. But now, her words felt like a chain around his neck, pulling him in a direction he didn't want to go. He found himself questioning his choices, wondering if his feelings for Lily were just a passing phase, or if they were something more. His relationship with Lily had opened up a part of him he hadn't known existed, something raw and vulnerable, but now, all that felt at risk. As he prepared to face Lily again, Ethan's thoughts were muddled with his mother's harsh judgment and the growing conflict inside him. He could no longer ignore the tug between his feelings for Lily and the expectations that had been drilled into him for so long. But one thing was certain. The deeper Ethan's feelings for Lily grew, the harder it became to ignore the part of himself that yearned for something more than what society, or his mother, expected of him. The days that followed Ethan's confrontation with his mother were some of the hardest he'd ever faced. Margaret's words had weighed heavily on him, gnawing at his conscience. He had always been a man of reason, someone who could separate his emotions from his duties. But now, everything felt blurred, as though his heart and mind were at war with one another. Ethan's relationship with Lily had begun as a simple professional connection, one that had quickly grown into something deeper and far more complicated than he could have ever anticipated. But now it felt like a mistake, a reckless deviation from the life his mother had carefully planned for him, a life that had been set in motion long before Lily ever entered the picture. Margaret's disapproval had hit him hard, and though he had tried to dismiss her judgment, the reality was that the weight of her expectations was impossible to ignore. After all, she wasn't just his mother. She was the matriarch of the Harrison family, and her influence over him had been profound for as long as he could remember. Ethan began to distance himself from Lily, even though every part of him resisted the decision. He thought that by pulling away, he could preserve both his relationship with his mother and the life he had worked so hard to build. He started to limit his visits to the hospital, making excuses about his increasing workload or the demands of his career. When he did speak to her, his words were curt and impersonal, a far cry from the warm conversations they once shared. Lily, for her part, couldn't understand what had happened. She had felt an immediate connection with Ethan, and over the past few weeks, she had come to rely on his kindness and support not only for her health but also for her emotional well-being. His presence had been a source of comfort, and his quiet strength had given her the courage to face the hardest battles of her life. But now, she felt a shift, a coldness from him that left her confused and hurt. At first, Lily tried to rationalize Ethan's behavior. Maybe he was simply busy, she told herself, or perhaps he was just preoccupied with his responsibilities. But as the days passed, she began to sense that something more was at play. She noticed how his smiles had become rare, how his eyes no longer held the warmth they once did. She found herself wondering if something had changed between them, if something had happened that she didn't understand. One evening, as Ethan stood by her hospital bed, his hands clenched into fists as he tried to maintain his distance, Lily couldn't hold back any longer. The pain in her chest wasn't just from the illness, it was from the uncertainty, the feeling of being abandoned by someone she had grown to care for so deeply. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling as she looked up at him. "What's going on? You've been avoiding me. You're not the same. Did I do something wrong?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had been trying so hard to keep his distance, to push her away in the name of duty and family expectations, that he had ignored how his actions were affecting her. Seeing the hurt in Lily's eyes made him feel like the worst kind of person. He couldn't look at her without feeling an overwhelming sense of guilt. She deserved better than this, better than the confusion he had caused by pulling away. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not you. It's me. I've been thinking a lot about things. My family, my future. And I just don't know if I can give you what you need." Lily's heart sank as she listened to his words. She didn't understand what he meant. He hadn't been this distant before. She searched his face for some sign of the man who had always shown her such kindness, but all she saw now was uncertainty, a wall that had been built between them. "I don't understand," she said, the words bitter in her mouth. "You're telling me you don't want to be with me because of your family? Because of what? Your career? Your reputation?" Ethan hesitated, the truth hanging heavily on his tongue. "It's complicated. My mother, she has plans for me, for my future. And I've spent my entire life following those plans. But you, Lily, you come from a different world. And I don't know how to reconcile that." Lily blinked, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and pain. She had always known that her background was different from his, but she had never imagined it would be something that could drive a wedge between them. Her voice wavered as she spoke again. "I never asked you to choose between me and your family, Ethan. I never wanted to come between you and your future. But it seems like you already made that choice." Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her words. The conflict inside him raged. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't true, that he hadn't made a choice yet, that he still cared for her deeply. But the weight of his mother's disapproval and the pressure of his responsibilities made him feel trapped. No matter how much he cared for Lily, it seemed impossible to break free from the expectations that had been placed on him for so long. "I'm not saying I don't care about you, Lily," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But my life isn't just mine anymore. I have obligations. I have responsibilities." Lily's gaze dropped to her hands, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Responsibilities? Is that what you think this is? A responsibility? Because I'm not some charity case, Ethan. I'm not someone you help because you feel obligated to." Ethan's heart shattered at the realization that his attempts to distance himself had hurt her in ways he hadn't even considered. He had never intended to make her feel like a burden, But in trying to navigate his world, he had inadvertently pushed her into a corner. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered, his voice raw. I didn't know what else to do." Lily's eyes met his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw the vulnerability in him, the man who was just as trapped as she was by their circumstances. But despite the pain, she couldn't bring herself to let him off the hook. "Maybe you should figure it out, Ethan," she said quietly. "But don't expect me to wait forever." With that, she turned away from him, her eyes closed to stop the tears that threatened to fall. Ethan stood there, motionless, feeling more lost than ever. He had hurt her, and now, even as his love for her remained strong, he wasn't sure if he could repair the damage he had done. Meanwhile, Lily's own health continued to deteriorate. She could no longer afford the treatments she needed, and her condition worsened with every passing day. She felt weak, both physically and emotionally, but she tried to push forward, trying not to let her insecurities about her place in Ethan's life consume her. The future felt uncertain in every way, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. As Ethan left her room, his mind a whirlpool of doubts, the path ahead seemed impossible to navigate. He had hoped that distance would help him make sense of things, but instead, it had only deepened his inner turmoil. He couldn't let go of Lily, but how could he keep fighting for something so forbidden? Something that seemed destined to tear his life apart? Ethan had spent weeks trying to distance himself from Lily, but the more he tried, the more the connection between them seemed to grow stronger, pulling him back each time. His inner conflict had reached a boiling point, and in the quiet of his thoughts, there was a realization he could no longer ignore. He could not forget Lily. But he couldn't ignore the sharp divide between their worlds either. To understand this divide better, Ethan knew he needed to learn more about the woman who had captured his heart in a way no one else had. One rainy afternoon, Ethan made a decision. He would visit Lily's small apartment, away from the sterile white walls of the hospital, where the air was thick with the weight of her struggles. He wanted to see where she came from, to understand the challenges that had shaped her into the strong, resilient woman she was. Lily's apartment was modest, tucked away in a quiet part of Brooklyn. The building was old, its brick facade showing signs of wear, but it was cozy. Inside, the space was filled with warmth despite the cold weather outside. The faint smell of fabric and thread lingered in the air, a reminder of Lily's profession as a seamstress. Ethan had heard about her job, but now seeing the piles of fabric stacked neatly on a table, the sewing machine by the window, he was struck by how little she had yet how much she made of what she had. Lily greeted him at the door with a forced smile, her dark eyes flicking nervously toward the kitchen. "I wasn't expecting company," she said softly. There was a hint of uncertainty in her voice, as though she wasn't sure how to navigate the delicate space between them after their recent tension. "I know," Ethan replied, his voice gentle. "I wanted to learn more about you, about your life. I've been thinking a lot about us, and I need to understand you better. If you're okay with that." Lily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, leading him into the modest living area. It wasn't much, but there was a quiet beauty in its simplicity. The walls were adorned with pictures, family photos and handmade decorations, and there was a sense of pride in the way everything was organized, as though every inch of the apartment was a testament to the hard work that had gone into building this life. They sat down at the small table by the window, the rain tapping gently on the glass, and for the first time, Ethan noticed the weariness in Lily's eyes. Her usual optimism was still there, but beneath it was a depth of exhaustion and struggle that spoke volumes about the life she led. Lily looked at him carefully before speaking, as if weighing her words. "I know it must seem strange to you, me, living here, doing what I do. But this is my reality. I grew up in a small town upstate, in a house that wasn't much more than a roof over our heads. My parents worked hard, but we were always behind on bills. I learned from an early age that survival was a daily challenge." She paused, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "It wasn't just about getting food on the table, it was about holding everything together. My mom, she's a good woman, but she's not always healthy, and I had to step up. I had to grow up fast." Ethan listened intently, his heart heavy with empathy. He had heard of people living in difficult conditions, but hearing Lily speak about it, so matter-of-factly, yet with an undeniable sadness, struck him in a way that was impossible to ignore. My younger siblings, they don't know what it's like to go without, Lily continued, her voice softening as she spoke of them. I've worked hard to make sure they have what they need. I've had to put my dreams on hold for them, but that's okay. They're my family. They need me. Ethan sat in stunned silence, the reality of Lily's life crashing over him like a wave. This was the woman he had been so drawn to. This woman who had given up so much, who had sacrificed everything for the people she loved. He had assumed, like most people, that success and happiness came easily to those who were born into privilege, that wealth could solve most problems. But Lily's story was a reminder of just how hard life could be when you had no safety net, no buffer against the storm. I don't know what to say, Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You've been through so much, and you're still standing strong. I don't know if I could do what you've done. Lily offered a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. You'd be surprised. When you're pushed to your limits, you find strength you didn't know you had. It's not easy, but you do what you have to do. Ethan's thoughts raced as he tried to process everything Lily had shared. He had always taken his comfortable life for granted, his family's wealth, his successful career, his reputation in the medical community. It was all he had ever known. And though he had occasionally questioned it, he had never truly considered what it meant to live without those luxuries. Sitting here with Lily in her small apartment, he began to question the true value of what he had. Was it worth it? Was the wealth and status he had inherited truly worth more than the love, sacrifice, and resilience that Lily had shown him? Ethan felt something shift within him. Lily wasn't just a patient anymore. She wasn't just a woman he had admired from afar. She represented everything that had been missing from his own life, the depth, the authenticity, the rawness of real struggle and real strength. He had been raised in a bubble of wealth and expectation, where everything was neatly arranged and controlled. But with Lily, there was nothing neat about her life. There was no security, no perfect future. Yet somehow, she had managed to build something beautiful in the midst of chaos. He thought about his own world, the one filled with luxury and high society events, the one where his mother dictated his every move. Was this really all that mattered? Was the pursuit of wealth and status the true purpose of life? Or was there something more, something deeper, that he had been overlooking? Lily caught his gaze, her eyes searching his face. I don't want your pity, Ethan. I've made peace with my life. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And I'm okay with that. I don't pity you, Lily, Ethan said, his voice firm now, as though he had come to a decision. I admire you. I think you're the strongest person I know. For the first time since he had entered her apartment, Lily's smile reached her eyes. It was brief, but it was enough. In that moment, Ethan knew he couldn't walk away from her, not because he felt sorry for her, but because he had finally seen her for who she truly was. A woman who had been through hell and kept standing tall, who had built a life from nothing and kept her heart intact in the process. As the afternoon passed, they talked more, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. Ethan listened, truly listened, to the woman who had become so important to him. And with every word she spoke, the weight of his mother's expectations and the privilege he had been born into seemed to fade just a little bit more. By the time Ethan left her apartment, the rain had stopped, but the clarity in his mind was just beginning. He could no longer pretend that the life he had been raised to live was the only path he could follow. Lily had opened his eyes to a world beyond wealth and status, one that was defined by love, resilience, and the kind of happiness that didn't come with a price tag. The news of Ethan taking Lily to important social events spread like wildfire. It didn't take long for whispers to reach the ears of those who mattered most in the world of New York high society. People whose opinions shaped careers, reputations, and lives. At first, Ethan had thought little of it. He had enjoyed Lily's company, wanted to show her the world he inhabited, and perhaps, in his naivety, believed that their differences in social status didn't matter. He wanted to prove to her, and to himself, that love could transcend such barriers. But Margaret Harrison had a different vision for her son, and she had never been one to sit idly by when things didn't go according to her plan. It started with a phone call. Margaret's voice, as usual, was smooth and controlled, but there was an edge to it that made Ethan's stomach churn. "Ethan, darling," she began, her tone light yet unmistakably authoritative, "I've heard the most absurd thing. You've been attending events with that woman. Lily, was it? Ethan's heart sank. He hadn't expected his mother to find out so soon, but now that she had, he knew the storm was coming. He took a deep breath before responding. Yes, I've been seeing her. She's kind, smart, and strong. She's more than just what? Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp. More than just a poor, uneducated seamstress. She paused, her words hanging in the air, each one like a blade cutting through his resolve. Ethan, you are a Harrison. You have a reputation to uphold. You cannot be seen with someone like her. Do you understand? Ethan stood still, his hand tightening around the phone. He had always respected his mother, but today he felt the weight of her expectations more heavily than ever before. He wanted to protest, to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He had been raised to uphold family values, to marry within their social class, to be part of the world his mother controlled. And yet here he was in love with someone who didn't fit into that world, someone who might never fit into it, no matter how much he wished otherwise. Mom, I can't just pretend she doesn't matter to me. She's important to me, Ethan said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. Margaret, however, was relentless. She had spent her entire life building an empire of wealth and influence, and she wasn't about to let her son throw it all away for someone who, in her eyes, was unworthy of him. You don't understand, Ethan. You're not just jeopardizing your future, you're dragging our name through the mud. This isn't some silly crush. This is about your legacy. The next morning, Margaret took matters into her own hands. She called in the favors she had accumulated over the years, arranging for Ethan to become engaged to Caroline Wells, a wealthy socialite with impeccable lineage. Caroline was beautiful, poised, and most importantly, she came from the kind of family Margaret could respect. It was the perfect match, one that would elevate the Harrisons' position in society even further. But as Margaret orchestrated her plan, she didn't stop there. In a calculated move, she reached out to her social circle, subtly weaving rumors about Lily, painting her as a gold digger, someone who was using Ethan to climb the social ladder. Margaret even arranged for an article to be written in a well-known society magazine, featuring an anonymous source who claimed to have seen Lily begging for attention at one of Ethan's charity events. The cruelty of it all hit Lily hard. She had been through so much in her life already, facing poverty, health issues, and family struggles, but this was different. This was the kind of attack she hadn't been prepared for, and it left her feeling humiliated, confused, and lost. She hadn't even known how to respond when the gossip started to spread. She had tried to ignore it, thinking it would eventually blow over. But it didn't. At first, she had been thrilled by Ethan's attention. She had seen the spark in his eyes when they were together, the tenderness in his gestures. She had believed that their love could bridge the divide between their worlds. But now, as the whispers grew louder, she began to question everything. The criticism, the judgment. It was like a wall was slowly closing in around her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could stand against it. One evening, after an especially difficult day at work, Lily sat alone in her small apartment, reading a newspaper article that featured her name. The words were harsh, accusing her of using Ethan for his wealth and status. She could feel the sting of each sentence, each line cutting deeper into her heart. She hadn't asked for any of this. All she had ever wanted was to be with Ethan because he made her feel seen, understood, loved. But now, it felt like she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. When Ethan came by later that evening, he found her sitting in the dim light, her eyes red from crying. He could see the pain in her expression, and his heart broke. "Lily, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice full of regret. "I never wanted this to happen. My mother, she's trying to force me into something I don't want. I never meant for you to get hurt." Lily wiped her tears away, trying to maintain her composure. "Ethan, I don't understand. One moment, you seem so sure of us, and the next, I feel like I'm being pushed away. Am I not enough for you? Is this all some sort of mistake?" The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had never intended for her to feel like this. He had never meant to hurt her. But in his struggle to balance his love for her with the pressure from his mother, he had caused her pain. And that was something he couldn't take back. "No, Lily," he said, kneeling beside her. "You are more than enough. I don't know how to fix this. My mother has a way of making me doubt myself. I wish I could stand up to her, but I've been conditioned to follow her lead my whole life." Lily's voice trembled as she spoke. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this, Ethan. Maybe we're from two different worlds that will never truly understand each other. I can't keep living in this limbo, wondering where I stand in your life." The pain in her voice was too much for Ethan to bear. He knew he had to make a decision, and it couldn't wait any longer. He had to choose between the woman he loved and the world that had always been his mother's world, with all its wealth, expectations, and privileges. But could he truly have both? Could he find a way to make it work? Or was their love doomed from the start? The pressure Ethan felt was unbearable. Every day seemed to carry more weight than the last, as the expectations of his mother, his social circle, and the world around him piled on top of him. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind, telling him that his life had been laid out for him in a neat, predictable path. A life of wealth, influence, and power, one that demanded loyalty to tradition, to the family's name, and to the values that had always been upheld. He had always accepted this reality, understanding that it was part of who he was. But now, the walls of that life were closing in on him, suffocating him with each passing day. As the days went by, Ethan found himself more and more conflicted. He walked the halls of his prestigious hospital, treating patients with the same professionalism and care he had always prided himself on. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to Lily, to the quiet moments they had shared, to the love that had blossomed between them despite the odds. He thought about her smile, her laugh, her unwavering resilience in the face of hardship. She was everything he had been searching for, someone who didn't care about wealth or status, but someone who saw him for who he truly was, someone who made him feel alive. But as the days wore on, he couldn't shake the guilt. He thought about his mother's disapproval, about the way she had tried to control his every move. Margaret had always been the center of his world, and her approval meant everything to him. But now, that world felt more like a gilded cage. He realized that if he continued down this path, obeying her every command and following the expectations set for him, he would be living a lie that would make him forever unhappy. Sitting at his desk in his office late one night, Ethan finally reached a breaking point. The realization hit him like a flood. He could not keep living his life for other people. He had spent so many years chasing success, climbing the ladder of his career, seeking approval from the people who were supposed to matter most, only to find that all of it felt hollow in comparison to the love he had for Lily. He had to be with her. He had to make a choice. In the quiet of his office, Ethan reflected on his life, the wealth, the privileges, the things he had been taught to value. The grand dinners, the luxurious vacations, the carefully curated circles of influence. He had grown up in a world where money and status defined worth. But now, standing at the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of his life, he knew deep in his heart that those things didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Lily. He thought back to the day he had first met her, her quiet strength, the way she had smiled despite the hardship she faced, the way she carried herself with dignity despite the odds stacked against her. Lily was everything he admired, brave, kind, and genuine. She had shown him what real love and connection were, something his life of wealth and privilege could never provide. With every moment that passed, Ethan became more certain of his decision. He could no longer hide from what his heart truly wanted. He had spent so much time trying to please his mother, trying to fulfill her dreams for him, and had put his own happiness aside in the process. Now he understood that true happiness could only come if he followed his heart. The decision was clear. He was going to be with Lily no matter the consequences. It wasn't just about love, it was about living authentically, making a choice that would lead him to the person who meant everything to him, even if the world didn't approve. He couldn't deny that doing so would be a challenge, that they would face hardships ahead. But as he stood up from his desk, feeling the weight of his decision settle within him, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face whatever came next, as long as Lily was by his side. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the city lights flickered on, Ethan drove to Lily's apartment. His heart pounded in his chest, nerves buzzing with anticipation and fear. He knew that what he was about to do would change everything, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right choice. When he arrived at Lily's door, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what kind of reception he would receive. He had hurt her, confused her with his indecision, and he knew that it would take time to rebuild her trust. But he couldn't stand by and watch her walk away, thinking that he didn't care for her. He knocked softly, and when she opened the door, her face softened at the sight of him, but there was still a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat. She was everything he remembered, everything he needed. "Lily," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about everything about us, and I've come to a decision." Lily's eyes widened, her brow furrowing with curiosity and caution. She crossed her arms, almost as if trying to protect herself from whatever he was about to say. "I've spent so much of my life trying to please others," Ethan continued, his voice steady now, the weight of his words heavy between them. "I've tried to follow a path that everyone else set for me, but it's not the life I want. It's not the life that makes me happy." Lily's expression softened, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "You make me happy, Lily," Ethan said, his voice stronger now. "You've shown me what real happiness is, and I can't ignore it any longer. I'm done living in fear of what others think. I love you, and I want to be with you, no matter what." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She had spent so much time questioning whether Ethan would ever truly choose her, whether he would let go of the world that had always defined him. But now, standing in front of her, his words broke down the walls she had built around her heart. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Ethan nodded, stepping closer to her, reaching for her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to be with you, Lily. I want to build a future with you. We'll face challenges, I know that. But as long as we're together, I believe we can overcome anything." Lily looked into his eyes, and in that moment, all her doubts faded. The love she had for him, and the love he had just declared for her, filled the space between them. With tears streaming down her face, she nodded, her voice a soft whisper. "I love you too, Ethan. I've always loved you." In that moment, they knew that they were about to embark on a journey that would not be easy. The world would not accept their love without resistance. But as long as they had each other, they knew they could face whatever came next together. The months that followed Ethan's life-changing decision were marked by both triumphs and tribulations. Ethan and Lily had begun their lives together, with all the hope and determination that their love brought. But they quickly realized that true love, while powerful, was not enough to shield them from the harsh realities of the world. Ethan had come to terms with his decision to defy his mother's wishes, and although his heart was at peace, his relationship with Margaret remained strained. Margaret, the formidable matriarch of the Harrison family, had always prided herself on controlling her son's life, dictating every aspect of it. Ethan's rejection of her plans for his future was a shock to her. The first few months were difficult, with Margaret refusing to meet Lily or acknowledge her existence. Ethan had been patient, understanding that his mother's love for him was not something she would easily relinquish. But slowly, Margaret began to realize that her son was no longer the young man she could shape with the promise of wealth and status. He was an adult now, and the love he felt for Lily was undeniable, fierce, and unshakable. It wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. It was a deep, life-altering connection. Despite her reservations, Margaret began to see that her son was capable of making his own decisions, and that those decisions would lead him to a future with the woman he loved. Margaret's acceptance was gradual. At first, it was a reluctant acknowledgement. She would occasionally agree to meet with Ethan and Lily, but her disapproval lingered in the air. The unspoken tension between them was palpable. Yet, over time, as she saw the way Ethan looked at Lily, the joy and peace in his eyes that had long been absent, Margaret began to soften. It was not an easy shift, and she never truly embraced Lily as she had hoped, but she could not deny the sincerity of their love. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily faced their own battles. Financial struggles became a regular part of their lives. Lily, despite her skills as a seamstress, was never able to bring in enough money to meet all the expenses. They made do with what little they had, living modestly in a small, cozy apartment that was far from the grandeur Ethan had known growing up. But there was something profoundly beautiful about their simple life. The space they shared was filled with love, laughter, and a bond that was stronger than any material possession. Lily's health continued to be a concern. Despite her determination, the toll of her illness was beginning to take a visible strain on her body. She often found herself fatigued, struggling to keep up with the demands of both her job and her ongoing treatments. Ethan, however, remained by her side every step of the way. He used his medical knowledge to help her find the best care possible, always seeking new treatments and alternative options to manage her condition. He never let her feel alone, offering constant encouragement and support. Despite all their efforts, the weight of their circumstances began to wear on them both. Lily's health deteriorated as the months went by, and though she fought with every ounce of strength, there were days when the pain and exhaustion seemed too much to bear. Ethan watched helplessly as the woman he loved struggled to maintain the energy to fight. He knew that no amount of love could shield her from the ravages of her illness. One winter evening, when the snow was falling gently outside their window, Lily collapsed in Ethan's arms. It was the culmination of a long battle, one she could no longer fight. Ethan rushed her to the hospital, but the doctors confirmed what they had all feared. Lily's condition had worsened beyond their control. The prognosis was dire, and all they could do now was offer her comfort in her final days. The news shattered Ethan. For weeks, he had been fighting for Lily's health, his love for her an unyielding force that kept him going. But now, facing the loss of the woman who had changed his life forever, he found himself consumed by a grief unlike anything he had ever known. Lily had become his world, the center of his existence. Without her, everything seemed meaningless. In her final days, Lily was calm, accepting of the reality that was unfolding before her. She held Ethan's hand, reassuring him that their love would transcend even death. They talked about the life they had shared, the joy of their love, the strength they had found in one another. "No matter what happens," Lily whispered, "I will always be with you. Our love will never end." Ethan struggled to keep his composure, but his heart was breaking. He could not imagine a life without her. Still, he knew that he had to honor her wishes and the promise they had made to each other, to love through every hardship, to face every obstacle together. And so he whispered back, "I will carry you with me always. In my heart, you'll never leave me." Lily passed away quietly in her sleep that night, her hand still firmly in Ethan's. Ethan was left alone, holding her hand in his, and though his world had been torn apart, he felt a sense of peace knowing that she had found comfort in his love. In the months that followed, Ethan was consumed by grief. He withdrew from his social circles, unable to face the world without Lily. Margaret, who had seen the strength of their bond and the depth of their love, offered what little comfort she could. But even her wealth and status could not ease the pain Ethan felt. Despite the tragedy of losing Lily, Ethan found solace in the lessons she had taught him. He had learned to love selflessly, to reject the expectations of a world that valued wealth over people, and to embrace a life that was truly his own. In the end, it was Lily's love that had shaped him into the man he had become. And as much as he missed her, he vowed to live his life in a way that would make her proud, to honor her memory by living with the same courage, strength, and love that she had shown him. As the years passed, Ethan continued his work as a cardiologist, but he carried Lily's spirit with him in everything he did. He dedicated his life to helping others, knowing that in doing so, he was keeping her memory alive. He never married again, for no one could ever compare to the woman who had taught him what true love really meant. And though the world had taken her from him, Ethan knew that in his heart, Lily would always be with him, guiding him, loving him, and inspiring him to be the man he had always meant to be. Their love, though tragic in its end, had transcended all the obstacles the world had thrown their way, and it would live on forever in the deepest corners of his soul.